The fact of the matter is, this was used as an ideological weapon to beat down Western civilization. You can't beat down Western civilization without beating down Christianity, which is the font of Western civilization. The individual lays anchor in Western civilization with family and religion principally. If your goal is to take total control of society, you look upon family and religion as an obstacle. Those are the areas of idea formation. And if we can corrupt your ideas, get you against your family, against Western civilization. Does it sound familiar, people in the schools, what's going on? If we can get you to turn against your religion, we've got you now. You're going to have to belong to something. And if the only form of identity left is the state, it's his government, now you've got him. Who gave us the idea of law, equality before law, the idea that all human beings are all of equal dignity? Who gave us the idea of jurisprudence? Where did all these ideas come from? What religion has a more elevated place for women? Our Blessed Mother. So if you tear us down, what do you want in its place? Where do you want to point to?
Well, Dr. Donohue, thank you for coming back. We've talked to you once before, right after Pope Francis's death, and it's an honor to have you here again. Last time we talked about how I finished the last episode with you talking about how I think you'd one day be the patron saint of clarity, but I should also probably say of common sense and clarity.
They kind of come together.
They do. So it might have been some time since our audience heard you last on this show. So I want to start by just giving a little biography of you, and then we're going to jump in and talk about your life, your story, your work, your passions, and then a little bit of a book that you have coming out with us. So,
fun.
All right.
Yes, I was born in New York City, in Manhattan, and my people, I'm second generation Irish. My people come from Kerry and Cork. I like the Kerry people probably a little bit better. They came over to the Bronx into Parkchester, and living a good life. I was born and raised in Long Island mostly, and my father left me and my sister when I was just a little kid, and I hardly knew him at all. Yeah. He was a delinquent man, to be quite honest with you. My mother was a nurse, and she worked evenings 4 to 12. So when I came home from school, I rarely saw her. I saw my grandmother and my grandfather. They went to the 8th grade, in Ireland. He was a big, strong, strapping Irishman, a policeman in New York City. And it was a little bit difficult because my father would drop by to see us once in a while, and it never went well. And my grandmother hated my father, and if we showed any affection toward him, then she would beat us. So there were some ugly episodes going up. Boys need a father. I've written in the past that too many whites don't get it. If blacks are more involved in crime than in street crime than white people, it has nothing to do with being black. So let's get over that. In almost every case, the kids have no father. I had no father, and I was always in trouble. I wasn't a mean kid, but oh boy, was I mischievous. Did I drive the nuns nuts? I was always crazy. Didn't do well in school. I didn't care about that. I acted up. I did this. My mother put me in a military high school, a Catholic military high school, figured that might straighten me up. Didn't work at all. I graduated at the bottom of my class. I was always in trouble with discipline. Then I went to St. John's University in New York, and they threw me out after 1 year, which they should have because I didn't go to school half the time. So now I'm 19. As the Vietnam War is on, I'm stationed in California after doing basic training in Texas, and I kind of grew up. I was always in love with jazz music. And the reason I mention that, if you read about jazz musicians, you can't help but read about Black history. So when the civil rights movement took place in the 1960s, and I'm in California, 66 to 70, in Northern California, I got deep into the civil rights movement and started reading about it. Got serious. I finally grew up. And I started taking classes at the local community college and did very well. And it just got me into basically the first budding of being a sociologist. I was drawn into it because of jazz and Black history and the like. And so I would apply to NYU after I get out of the Air Force, and they didn't know what to do with me. They said, you have great grades at this community college. You had horrible grades before, but you're 4 years older. So we're going to send out 2 days worth of exams onto the education department on the Beale Air Force Base in Northern California to see how you do. And they said, you aced it, so we're going to let you come to NYU. And from there on, I got serious and got my bachelor's, my master's. I went to the New School for Social Research, which is a very left wing. I studied under the left. I'm glad I did because I know how they think. They're not very creative, by the way. So then I went back to NYU for the PhD. And while I was working there, doing my PhD, I worked in Spanish Harlem. I took a job in Spanish Harlem. Now, I was offered jobs as an accountant, good paying jobs, because when I was in the Air Force, they trained me as an accountant. And I was very good at it. I didn't like it, though. It wasn't for me. So I was a single guy, and I decided, well, what are you going to do, Bill? I'm going to work in Spanish Harlem. How did I get the job? I sent out 59 letters to schools in Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx with Saint, anyone to see if they could take me. I didn't even have enough brains to think maybe I should go to the Department of Education at the Archdiocese and apply. Never occurred to me, or the Diocese of Brooklyn. The first one I got the phone call from was in Spanish Harlem because nobody wanted to go there. It was a bad neighborhood back there in the 1970s, very high crime rate, and they paid me practically nothing, and I didn't care. I was happy. And as a sociologist, boy, what a dream. I loved those kids, those Black and Puerto Rican kids, and the mothers who took care of the kids. It was a great experience for me. And I went to school at night. And then eventually I took a job because I just had to do the dissertation at that point, and I went to Pittsburgh at a small Catholic college, LaRoche College in Pittsburgh. And from there, I had opportunities to look elsewhere and moved to other schools, but eventually I wanted to come back either to New York. I did spend a year at the Heritage Foundation, 87 to 88. Yeah. I was the first person chosen for the Bradley Resident Scholar Program. They'd bring guys I had just turned 40 years of age, and I had already written my first book on the ACLU, which went over very, very big. Fortune magazine had picked it up. That was interesting. People say, who'd you know to get into Fortune? I didn't know anybody. It's the guy liked it. They reviewed it. It's just my first invitation dealing with some elites in our society. But that was a very good experience for me. I wrote my second book there, 87, 88, called The New Freedom. It's about our debased idea of liberty in this country, very different from the Catholic understanding, which is freedom to do what you ought to do, not what you want to do. And then I went back to the college in Pittsburgh, and I wrote another book on the ACLU. And then I got picked up. It's a very long story. Let me just cut to the quick. Bishop Whirl, who later became Cardinal Whirl in Washington, Bishop Whirl in Pittsburgh, wanted me to set up a Pittsburgh chapter of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. And he had seen me on TV in Pittsburgh, and I made a name for myself with Phil Donohue and Larry King and all these other shows. And I looked into the Catholic League, and they were bankrupt in many ways. I don't just mean financially. I mean organizationally. They didn't know what they were doing. Father Bloom had founded it, had passed away, and they passed it over to lay people. One was as clueless as the other. I said to Bishop Whirl, I said, I'll set up my own organization to compete with the Catholic League because they're moribund. And he said, fine. Next thing I know, I get a phone call from New York. They had moved the headquarters of the Catholic League from Milwaukee it started in 1973 with Father Bloom. They moved it to the suburb of Philadelphia, Ballackinwood, in 1990. And then in 1992, in November, they moved to New York City in the Archdiocese of New York. So this priest said to me, listen, we know you want to set up this competitor to the Catholic League. Why don't you come in? I said, why should I bother? You do everything wrong. He said, you're right. He wasn't at all defensive. I'm new. It's new in New York. We understand you're from New York. Give us a shot. I said, I will. I came in, had a cane. I was about ready to go undergo back surgery. And it's very interesting. they had a headhunter meet me in LaGuardia before I met with Father Eichner and some other people at the Archdiocese, and I guess it was some bait. I already had tenure, so I had a safe job with my family in Pittsburgh, and the guy from the headhunter says to me, "Well, I got to ask you a question. Anna Quinlan has an interest in putting somebody in this job. What do you think about that?" Anna Quinlan, for the listeners here, was a very liberal Irish Catholic, almost anti-Catholic writer for the New York Times. So I said to him, "I'm going to tell you something right now, sir. If you want somebody like Anna Quinlan, then you don't want Bill Donohue, because I am very much the opposite. I wasn't going to lie about it and try to, fudge my way in." And he just started to smile, and he said, "Excuse me." And he went over and called Father Eichner and says, "You want to meet with this guy?" I guess I said the right thing, but I didn't try to steer it because, quite frankly, what am I going to do? Lie about coming in that I'm some kind of an Anna Quinlan progressive Catholic? So, in any event.
So that was what year we took over?
I took over in July the 1st of 1993.
93, yeah.
And I taught at NYU newly minted PhDs from around the world. I've taught every single class from the second grade through graduate school, through newly minted PhDs from around the world. And that's why I have to speak with clarity, because if you're speaking about the founders of America, you should be able to speak about them to elementary students, high school students, college students, and graduate students and PhDs and the like. Depending on who the audience is, you should be able to gear your discussion to them so they understand it. And you don't want to talk down to them, but you don't want to talk above them to show how smart you are, which I can't stand that strain in intellectuals.
All right, since I have a doctorate in sociology right here across the table, I want to ask you a question. That's something you alluded to earlier, and I've never really gotten a good answer from someone. You mentioned that the Black community has struggled with fatherhood.
Yes.
Why?
Largely because of, some of them were well-meaning people, but many of them were not. Let me give you an example. People say it's a result of slavery. No, that's not true. As much as I have nothing but the greatest admiration for Daniel Patrick Moynihan, I think he was wrong on looking at the legacy of slavery. It certainly had some effect. But as recently as 1950 in this country, 85% of Black families had a father and a mother. 1950. It started to crash in the 60s and then got crazy after that. We started to say in the 1960s that we've got all this money and we're going to make equality. We're going to bring you up to speed. The white man's going to do it for you. Now, the way it was, they set up the welfare system. They didn't do it intentionally, although some did. And I'm going to get to that in just a sec. Some did. If the father left the wife and the children, the state would pay more money for her and the children than she would get if her husband and the father were still there in most cases. In other words, it was an invitation for the father to leave. That helped create this situation. Now, I say not everything was a matter of a mistake. Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven, Piven, husband and wife, Columbia University professors in social work. We're talking early 60s here. And they wrote, the actual article they wrote was in 1966, but they were busy before that. They made an argument in The Nation magazine, which was a Stalinist publication, still exists today, very far left publication. They explicitly said, and people can check it themselves, look at my books, and other people, Irving Kristol and others have written about this, that we want to get every possible person who's remotely eligible onto the welfare rolls immediately. But the goal is this. We want to break the welfare system. We want New York City to go bankrupt. That's what they said. Why would you want New York City to go bankrupt? Because if New York City goes bankrupt, the federal government has no choice but to step in and create socialism. They're not going to let New York City go bankrupt. They were advisors along with Mitchell Ginsburg, to John Lindsay, who was a wealthy guy who went to Yale. He died personally broke, and he broke New York City. They advised him, And he accepted their advice. And what did they do in New York City? From 1969 to 1972, for about 3 years, anybody in New York City could walk into a welfare office, declare himself to be poor, and he could immediately put on the welfare rolls. You didn't have to prove anything. You could be John D. Rockefeller III's son. Because if you had to ask a person to prove their economic status, that was demeaning to the poor. You demean the poor by having them prove their poverty. Well, the welfare rolls went from 550,000 to 1,550,000 in a matter of 3 years. The city was going under. Lindsay finally decided we can't go on with this. They stopped it, but it was too late. And New York City basically went bankrupt. They had to bail it out in the 1970s. So what I'm saying is the black family, yes, it did suffer under slavery. Moynihan was right about that. But quite frankly, as recently as 1950, it was in better shape. It was the ideas that took place. And by the way, I want to mention this. I just learned it from your father last time I was in town, that Thomas Sowell was from Gastonia.
Yeah.
Well, he had a great effect on me. And I learned some of these ideas from Thomas Sowell about this. He spoke so eloquently about what happened with the welfare state in the 1960s. Those are the people who destroyed the black family. And once the father leaves, he's not coming back. And they gave economic incentives to do this. And quite frankly, I think it's born of racism. And I see it today. We see it, quite frankly, even Pope Francis did buy into it with UBI, Universal Basic Income, which I talk about in the new book. Mm-hmm. The idea that, we're going to give everybody a free ride.
Yeah.
Look, I worked with the black and the Puerto Rican kids. They can learn. I saw them. They took the SRA test in Spanish Harlem. The average kid, if you were in the fourth grade and you were 4 years, 5 months, and they took the test and you're 5 years, 5 months, you went up 1 year the next year, fine. Most of the kids were behind the national. My kids would go 1 year and a half in 1 year ahead. My students did better than anybody in Spanish Harlem. I just drilled it into their heads. I never took an education course in my life. What a waste of time.
Yeah.
I drilled it into their heads about math and about science and about religion and history. I know black kids can learn, but the attitude of the white liberal, well-educated white liberal is they're fundamentally racist. They're basically saying, you can't do it. You can't cut it like everybody else. I remember when I would say to my students, the black and Puerto Rican kids, when they took a loose leaf paper and they ripped it out of the binder and had the jagged edges, I refused to accept it. It had to be clean. I had a teacher from the public schools come in and saying that I'm being too hard on them. I said, really? So when you go into the more affluent schools, would you put up with that? No, I don't. She said, you have to understand, these kids come from a bad environment. I know it better than you, miss, because I'm here all the time. I know they come from a bad environment. And one of the reasons they're there is because nobody gave them middle-class values. And you say, they got upset. You want to give them middle-class values? What values do you think really help the poor the most? Middle-class values. It's called discipline. It's called punctuality. It's called a work ethic. The white liberals, in other words, don't believe. They don't believe that blacks are their equal. Can I say one more thing about this? I'm going on about too long.
I love it. You got all day if you want. Hey guys, real quick, we noticed 80% of you that watch the episodes are not subscribed. So please do me the favor and subscribe and hit the bell for notification. That helps you get the content, but it also helps this amazing stuff get spread to other people just like you. Thanks for your help. Now let's dive back in.
The first sociologist in American history was called George Fitzhugh, Fitzhugh. He wrote a book in the 1950s, okay? And the book was a defense of slavery. Now, people say, oh, wow, the first sociologist was some redneck racist. No, he was a racist, all right, but he's a well-educated guy. He was no redneck. He hated capitalism. What he said, and I'm not paraphrasing it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing it a little because I don't have the actual text in front of me, but I'm not off by much. He basically said, I'm not reading into it. Black people are fundamentally stupid. That's the way they are. You can't do anything with them. The reason we have to have slavery is because if you don't have slavery, you're going to have the black man competing against the white man in a capitalist society. And he can't do so because he's inferior. He's intellectually inferior to the white man. It's better to keep him down on the farm. We'll take care of him under slavery because he can't compete again. Now, fast forward to the 1980s, Charles Murray, a social scientist, wrote an article about the coming of the custodial democracy. The white elites in our society don't want to treat blacks as equal. They treat them as custodians, just as we do the Indians. We're going to take care of them. In other words, this paternalism, this excessive paternalism, it smacks of this hubris that the white man always knows better than the black man, and you're not equal. I got news for you. Blacks can compete like anybody else. Look at the genius of Thomas Sowell, who, by the way, is hated by white liberals because he points all these things out. So, yeah, if you really believe in equality and you're not a racist, then you have to hold blacks accountable as much as you would hold white people accountable. We don't do that in this country because too many white liberals are racist. They won't admit it, but they're saying, well, you can't do it, so we'll do it for you. We'll have reparations. We'll have affirmative action. We'll take care of you. Nobody needs to be taken care of. That kind of paternalism is disgusting.
Beautifully said. Now, your doctorate was on the ACLU,
yes.
Like the history of it. Or what did you... That must have fueled your lifetime passion for piercing the ethos of the liberal mind in some way. So talk to us a little bit about what that dissertation was all about, and why'd you choose that, and how did it influence you?
I chose the ACLU because I was fascinated by their idea of liberty. And to me, it struck me as radical individualism, that there's something besides the rights of the individual, which are very important. But you also have the public weal, the common weal, the common good, as we say it in Catholic vernacular. That has to count for something. The ACLU didn't care about it. So I thought, you know what? Let me do something. Let me read all of their annual reports going back to 1920, which I did. Let me read all the minutes of the board of directors, which began in the 1960s. Let me read the FBI files on the ACLU. And by the way, there's only two places where you can get them, from the FBI and the ACLU. Guess who made them available to me first?
The ACLU, probably, no?
No,
the FBI. The FBI, because
yeah.
I thought FBI wasn't going to give anything.
Oh, no. I could go to their reading room, they said. The ACLU said, no, you can't see them. And finally, I got a chance to see them.
Wow, okay.
I could speak for hours on that. But then I didn't want to do just that. I interviewed the president of the ACLU, Norman Dawson. I also interviewed the vice president, Alan Reitman. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Norman Dawson at that time. It was Arya Nair. Arya Nair, he was actually the executive director. I think Dawson was the president. Arya Nair was the chief executive, and he asked me to leave the room because he didn't like my line of questioning. And apropos your questions before, why did I get involved in this? I said, I know the ACLU is very much concerned about the rights of the accused, and it's right, but what about the rights of victims, though? Do they have rights, too? He said, I don't like your line of questioning. What's this about? I said, I'm studying for a PhD in sociology at NYU, and he cut me off. I said to Alan Reitman, number 2 in command the next day, and he said, well, he tried to make excuses for him. More importantly, I met with the guy who founded the ACLU, Roger Baldwin, in June of 1978. He was out of Boston. He had moved to New York, lived on Hudson Street, downtown New York. And I found him fascinating. He was an older guy. He died at the age of 91. I think it was Jimmy Carter who gave him the Medal of Freedom Award. He was very kind to me. This is a man who, you can tell a lot about an organization by the founder. He was a socialist and a nudist, and so that tells you a little bit about where the ACLU was going.
A nudist?
Yeah, a nudist and a socialist. The founder of the ACLU.
I didn't expect that. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I hope when you met him, he had clothes.
He had clothes on at that time, and I'm telling you, he was an interesting guy. He didn't realize the ACLU had gone so far. He said, well, they would never justify prostitution. I said, no, excuse me, Mr. Baldwin, the organization you founded, in fact, justifies and once prostitution legalized, he didn't know it got kind of run away. He founded it basically for one reason, for the rights of workers, okay? Mm-hmm. he traveled in communist circles as a fellow traveler, but he himself was not a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. But he was not really interested in freedom of speech as an end. It was a means to an end for the working class so that they'd have equal rights or get more rights than what they had vis-a-vis the capitalist class. For example, they never get involved in prohibition. And I said, why didn't you? He said, well, we were caught up in the worker rights thing.
Sure.
They were caught up in the worker rights to such an extent that even after the Communist Party of the United States had softened its objections to the Wagner Act, the ACLU was still in opposition to it. You know, he wrote a book called Liberty Under the Soviets. This is the father of American civil liberties. Wrote a book, I think it was 1928, The Liberty Under the Soviets. And you know, he bought into all that very far left business until August the 23rd of 1939, because that's the day of the Nazi-Soviet pact. And that rocked the liberals. Wait a minute, Stalin and Lenin getting together?
Mm-hmm.
This can't be. And they did. And then they turned on Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn was an Irish communist member of the Communist Party, openly so. And the ACLU went through its only conservative period in the 40s and 50s because they were concerned about Hitler. And not so much Stalin, was concerned about Hitler. And if they thought if those two are getting together, we got to get rid of the communists because we can't trust them anymore. And so they did have a conservative bent in the 40s and 50s. Then they changed back to the 60s again. But a lot of inconsistencies. The ACLU, for example, led the fight against the Equal Rights Amendment against women. And so did Eleanor Roosevelt in the 1920s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. Not until 1970, the Dorothy Kenyon, a judge, who led the fight against the Equal Rights Amendment, now said women are oppressed unless we get the Equal Rights Amendment. Well, what was going on? Back in the 20s and 30s, the idea of equal rights for women meant that you don't become a coal miner.
Mm-hmm. That
you should have. And back then, we had something called the family wage.
Yes.
The breadwinner got more money than the single man or the single woman. It wasn't about individualism. Now, we went through this kind of intellectual somersault of feminism, but my point is the ACLU led the fight against the ERA, and then you were fascist if you weren't in favor of the ERA. And to this day, it was funny because in the summer of late 70s, I'm working at the ACLU, and I've got a strong work ethic. I was there all day long because I was teaching in Pittsburgh, but not during the summer, and I had to work on the dissertation. I was reading through the stuff. So the ACLU officers would walk by. I said, I'm in my 20s. Why are you in here all day long? I'm doing a dissertation. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? Because you seem to be looking at everything we have here. I said, well, for example, why did you change your views on the ERA? They exploded. They got angry at me. You better tell the truth. We changed our mind about that. I said, excuse me, I'm just trying to be truthful here. You led the fight against the ERA for decades. Now you're changing. Of course, I'm going to report that. They kind of got a sniff that maybe I wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
And I found out how phony that. I debated Norman Dawson. He was the guy at Harvard Law School in 1991, and all over the campus they had pictures of the boxing gloves, Donohue versus Dawson, standing room only, thousands of people, and the Federalist Society brought me in, and the ACLU brought in Dawson. Debate went on for hours, and Dukakis had been the governor there. He ran unsuccessfully for president in '88.
Yeah. The
whole crowd was against me the entire night, except for one time. And everybody exploded, applauded me, and stood up. And Dorset, who's a Jewish fella, that's relevant here, he didn't know what happened. I said, for the viewers, you'd understand that the ACLU defended a handful of Nazis marching in Skokie, Illinois in 1978. I wish they would defend pro-lifers. That would take courage, not a bunch of crackpots. So I said to Dorset, I said, your idea of liberty for Nazis is that you want to defend them. I want to defeat them. Well, the place erupted on my side, a heavily Jewish audience, and he didn't know what to say on that. But most of the time, they were against me.
Yeah,
but, They wouldn't, by the way, one final thing. Both sides agreed that they would release a tape of the debate. After it was over, the ACLU side said, there's not going to be a review. The students who brought me in. So they went to a vote to the Harvard law faculty. Donohue wants the tape, because I think I did pretty well in the debate, released, and that was the agreement ahead of time. So they said the Harvard Law faculty would make a decision, and their decision was if both parties agree, then it can be released. Otherwise, it won't be. They already knew that Dorset wasn't going to.
Yeah.
So the hypocrisy of the left was one of the reasons why I became a conservative in the first place.
So you study the ACLU, you see how it changes through the years. You get a piercing insight into the mind of the left, the leftist ideology. And then you end up working with the Catholic League, and pretty much right away, your emphasis is how does the leftist media portray the Catholic faith? I mean, is that a major fact here? I mean, a major part of what you focus on? Because when people misspeak or misrepresent the church, or when they badmouth the Catholic Church, you are the one that comes to the defense of Holy Mother Church.
Right. I've often had a short fuse for hypocrisy. Now, we're all inconsistent to some extent. We understand that. I'm talking about rank hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like I said, I had a liberal flirtation a little bit in the Air Force for a while, but I saw all these duplicitous professors and students and the like, and justifying totalitarianism like that.
But what did Churchill say, right?
When you're young, you can be idealistic.
I think the phrase is something like, if you're when you're young and if you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart.
Well,
if you're not old and conservative, you don't have a brain.
Churchill was usually right about most of these things. He certainly was right, and I saw it. And I guess I came from working class background, so common sense was kind of ingrained in me, and that's one of the concerns I have. So and it was Bishop Whirl, who then became Cardinal Whirl out of Pittsburgh, who got me started with the Catholic League. And he saw in me, my interest in this area, because I write about a lot of cultural things. If you're going to write culture, anybody who talks about culture has to talk about religion. It's impossible not to. It's the heart of every culture is religion.
Chesterton said, the old saying is don't talk about religion or politics. And he said all there is in life is religion and politics, because religion is your relationship with God,
right,
and politics is your relationship with man. There's no other relationships.
There's nothing else left to talk about.
Isn't that good?
That's so true. So I credit Bishop Whirl, Cardinal Whirl, for getting me involved in that. And I've had a very good board of directors. I inherited a mess, and I said, listen, give me a lot of rope, and if I do some things wrong, hang me on it. But I know what I'm doing. Just let me go. I know how to work the media, and I'll straighten it out. They kept their hands off, and thank God we've been doing very well.
So one of the things that you learned through the years is, which culminates in this new book you have coming out, is the ruling class and the radicals. You have this interesting way of explaining there's a ruling class and there's radicals, and they're not the same, but they kind of have a common enemy now. Talk to us a little bit about what that, because that's not you just being an intellect and like study. That's your lifetime of experience backed with your education in this stuff. So you have a clarity of thought on these two forces in our society that I think when I read your introduction to this, understanding what you mean by ruling class, what you mean by radicals, it really deciphered kind of the issue, the enemies that have been attacking my vantage point on life and
right,
God and church. What's the ruling class and what's the radicals?
Most people would understand the ruling class to be the decision makers, the elites in all the major institutions of our society, and would look upon them as being very different from the radicals. So if we look at historical models, well, you've had the master and you've had the slave. They didn't have anything in common. You've had under feudalism, you had the lords, you had the peasants. Didn't have anything in common. In a capitalist society, you had the owners of business, the means of production, and then the workers. The workers were supposedly working against the interest of the capitalist class. A lot of truth to that historically. What I'm saying is that in more recent times, you've seen a kind of coalition here. There's been a kind of a rough coalition, not in every case. Too often now we've seen a blending where the ruling class has adopted much of the vision of the radicals. You can see this obviously in one person, in George Soros, who has radical ideas and is a member of the ruling class for certain. but you can see this in so many walks of our life in society. There's been a Trump effect to some extent, but you're not going to get rid of this animus and this self-hatred and against Christianity in particular that exist. The radicals in our society have always wanted to control. The ruling class want to control. There's an interest there. But they generally had different views. But so often in more recent times, we've seen that the ruling class has adopted much of the thinking of the radical class. So Saul Alinsky was a radical intellectual, and he worked with Obama-type people in Chicago to get them going on these different things. And I'm saying is that it's a very dangerous situation. If the goal is control, if the goal is power, that has to come from government. Now, who's going to challenge government? In society, you basically have three layers. Let me put it out. You've got the top layer, that would be the ruling class, and in particular in the political structure, those who run the government. And in the economy, you have a different class. And then you have, at the bottom, you have the individual. What's in between the individual and the state, the government? What's in between? It's called mediating structures, intermediary structures. What would that be? Family, church, school, media, voluntary associations in particular, unions. They're in between. The individual lays anchor in Western civilization with family and religion principally. That means, of course, the nuclear family, and that means in the West, Christianity for the most part. If your goal is to take total control of society, as some people do and I'm saying all, as many of them do in the elites, you look upon family and religion as an obstacle. Because if you can detach the individual from his family, if you can detach the individual from his religion, he still needs to have communion in something. You have the naked individual. He needs to belong to something. And if the only form of identity left is the state, it's his government, now you've got him. Hitler understood this. Stalin understood this.
They did.
They would have people, for example, under Stalin, they would get family members to testify against family members. They didn't do anything wrong to them. They were told what you had to tell. In other words, you were told to lie about your father, your mother, your wife, your son, your husband, that they were out to do things to you which were nefarious, because they wanted to psychologically to get into your heads. They wanted to break up the family. If they break up the family, and this is what the Marxists have always wanted to do, particularly the cultural Marxists. Karl Marx wanted to destroy the family, but he wanted an economic revolution. The cultural Marxists said, well, I don't think we're going to get the workers to revolutionize they're kind of like Trumpians. But what we'll do is we'll have a long march through the institutions, as Antonio Gramsci said, the Italian Marxists. We'll take over the media. We'll take over the entertainment industry. We'll take over the schools. We'll take over the churches. Because those are the areas of idea formation. Yes. And if we can corrupt your ideas, get you against your family, against Western civilization. Does it sound familiar, people, in the schools, what's going on? If we can get you to turn against your religion, we've got you now. You're going to have to belong to something. And I'm saying it's not a matter of mistake, and I get this all the time. Well, there have been a lot of bad decisions made by people. Yes, we all make bad decisions, and we make mistakes. I'm talking about people who are deliberately, by design, know exactly what they're doing. This is not a conspiracy, people, because I read what they say, okay? And I quote them in the book. So it's all there, Christianity in the Crosshairs. You've got a confluence here of forces which typically have been somewhat separated, radicals coming together with the ruling class, and you saw it particularly under the Biden administration.
The most damning statements about the World Economic Forum are from the people in charge of the World Economic Forum. You just have to read their words. And they talk about this. They envision a society when you own nothing and are perfectly happy. It's just an interesting thing where they're not bashful about it. These radicals, they actually state their goals.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because, again, people say, well, maybe you're reading into it. There's no hyperbole here. Quite frankly, what we're saying is in the book, the ruling class doesn't want to enslave the middle class. They want a docile population. They want passivity. They don't want resistance. So you mentioned the World Economic Forum. Well, what did they say? Yuval Harris, I believe, his last name is one of the leading thinkers there. He said, "What are we going to do with all the useless people?
Yes.
Once we take over, these are the super globalists, useless people." Well, from a Catholic perspective, that is simply despotic. That's incredible. There are no useless people that Christ ever made. But this is the way some of the elites do on the global scale, and the World Economic Forum is only one expression of that. There are other expressions of it, but again, it's part of this. I know better. I know better than you do.
Yeah, it's the elitism. Now, you talked about docility. Like first of all, I've studied the Catholic social doctrine a lot. All the different encyclicals going back to Rerum Novarum, 1891. And a number of those encyclicals talk about these intermediary institutions. But you just point out just something fascinating. If you get rid of those, like if you can infiltrate those and get rid of them, corrupt them to where they're really not providing for the needs of the individual, then the individual is going to take refuge in the higher authority, which is the state. Or if the state's even weak, now a world government. I mean, I think that's what globalists kind of are aiming for. So I just think that it's fascinating that this is a clear strategy, and actually the Catholic Church and her wisdom of Catholic social doctrine, which, by the way, I always point out, Catholic social doctrine is a subset of moral theology. Mm-hmm. So the principle of subsidiarity, it's a moral doctrine. It's not a theory. It's not just a theory. So the principle of subsidiarity is these smaller levels of institution must be given as much authority as possible. If a small community can take care of an individual, let the community take care of the individual. Don't let the state do it. So I love that. But clearly this is why the left usually ends up being totalitarian at the highest level possible. It's not just Russia, it's the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. It's not just the Soviet Union now, it's the World Economic Forum, or NATO, or the biggest possible community is always better for the left because they want to destroy these smaller intermediary institutions. So that kind of pierces into the heart and mind of the far left, and these ruling classes and the radicals seem to share this strategy. Now, you mentioned a little bit in your book about the prophetic fiction of 1984 and Brave New World, and we're kind of living that out. You want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, people foresaw this happening, and here we are.
Well, particularly, I mean, look, I don't take anything away from Orwell. He was brilliant. He foresaw what was happening in the Soviet Union. He's right in the 1940s. He already learned from that to some extent, and with the government. But Huxley, to me, interests me more. He was a student of Orwell in the 1930s, and he says what the ruling class really wants is docility, and a kind of a quietude of people that they just won't be resistant. You can't get that. See, they can't get that through the old model of authoritarianism. There's a difference between authoritarianism and totalitarianism. The old-fashioned dictators, the czars in Russia, mm-hmm. they made all the decisions on government. They don't care what economic order they had. They didn't care what your belief in God is, or if you had a belief or not. They didn't care about that. They didn't care if you left the country. They're just simply saying, we call all the shots on the government. A totalitarian regime is what we're talking here about, with the ultimate goal, which is a political, economic, social, and cultural dictatorship across the board. Mm. Now the government runs everything. And there's nothing more private than your mind. They want that. They want thought control. Mm. You can't have a discussion about thought without talking about religion, because you're talking about conscience. Yes. They knew all this. What did Jim Jones do when he's involved with the cults?
Right.
He he took all the money from the people, including the Social Security checks. He had sex with the men and the women. He turned the children against the parents. He had them spy on them. He knew, as Lenin knew, Mao knew this, okay? Stalin knew it. They all know. If you break up the family, if you break up religion, there's nothing left. You're an empty shell. It's not normal for a human being to say, I'm self-sufficient.
Yes.
You have to attach yourself to something. It's always going to be your family and religion. But that's why they've always been at war on it. Now, the good news is the family and religion are much more resilient. You've seen what's happened. That doesn't justify us for being to be complacent. The attacks on the family and religion are real, and they're coming not just from Hollywood and from the schools. They're coming from government. Mm-hmm. And when it comes from government, that's where the biggest threat to liberty is, right there.
Which is why I asked, my very first question really was about what you were saying, how the black community's been fatherless in a certain way, because I had a feeling you were going to say it's tied in with government policy, and it had an agenda to keep that community weak by keeping the father out of the house. And by the way, they might not have had the statistic, but you and I know that even Harvard, of all places, had to release their study that showed that mothers have almost no statistical influence on whether the kids go to church or not, once they grow up and leave the house. It's the father.
It's the father.
It's like all the father. It's I mean, I love moms.
Right.
They're amazing, but they have like a 2 or 3% influence, and the fathers have like a 90% influence. It's unbelievable. It's undeniable. It's so, even if you cut the numbers in half and half again, it's still unbelievable. The father is what determines statistically whether the child is going to be a God-fearing man or woman.
And so the attacks on manliness in our society, and you mentioned Shackleton when last time I was with you.
Yeah.
The attack on manliness does matter. I'm not preaching here, macho, super macho man.
You're a very toxic masculine guy, right? Toxic, right? That's the word, right?
I think what's toxic is that when you teach little boys to be like girls. I mean, I don't want the feminization of men. I don't like extremes, obviously. I mean, but the thing is, yeah, we don't benefit in society by having little boys being taught that toxic masculinity, whatever that's supposed to be, is a problem.
I think the funniest thing you've ever said, I don't even know how it relates exactly, but you made a reference when we were at dinner about the whole transgender movement and people see you and refer to you as a big Irish guy, and you say,
I'm a Chinese dwarf. You're wrong. I may look like a big Irishman, but I'm actually a Chinese dwarf. I'm self-identifying. I mean, if we want to go down this road, where does it end? I remember during the Summer of Hate, they call it the Summer of Love. No, it wasn't 2020, it was Summer of Hate, in Seattle, and they're burning down the place in Portland. That's what they do. They burn things down, the police stations. A cop was having to search a woman suspected as a domestic terrorist, and the leftist was screaming at him, "You can't touch her. She's a woman." He goes, I'm a woman too. I just self-identified. How's that?
Yeah, how's that?
I mean, but you see, that all gets back to the question of truth and whatnot. But I get me a little bit off base, but this.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, tools of control, something that you talk about in this book. There's new tools of control, thought and behavior, and so in your decades of work, how have you seen the tactics of controlling thought and behavior evolving over time? It seems like the left has gotten even more strategic, more technical. They have more tools at their disposal. How is this evolving, or is it just the same as it was 60 years ago?
No, it's not the same at all. And I mean, everybody goes back to the 60s, which is a good place to start. But let me mention something that happened in the 1980s, which is central to what I'm talking about here.
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
Jesse Jackson is out at Stanford University in the 1980s, and they're yelling, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture's got to go."
Oh, wow.
Now, why would you want to get rid of Western culture? That was the beginning of laying the groundwork for multiculturalism. I remember the Bass family offered $20 million to Yale University for a new program in Western Civ, and the faculty voted it down. We want multiculturalism. Now, the proponents of multiculturalism will tell you in its most auspicious reading that all we mean by that, and they're not telling the truth, I'll get to that in a sec, all we mean by that is that we should respect different cultures around the world. We shouldn't have this hubris, this uppiness that America is better, Western civilization is better, all cultures are equal, and we have to treat them that way. Well, first of all, that's not true. It's a lie. I'll address that in just a sec. But the fact of the matter is, this was used, multiculturalism, as a weapon, as an ideological weapon to beat down Western civilization. You can't beat down Western civilization without beating down Christianity, which is the font of Western civilization. They know exactly what they're doing. They wanted to elevate all of these other smaller cultures to make it like a moral equality, that there's no difference between one and another. A story which I give as a nice anecdote, I've mentioned it before. I was at Carnegie Mellon University around 1990. I was teaching at LaRoche College in Pittsburgh after I came back from the Heritage Foundation before I took over this job. And I was asked to address PhD students in engineering. And this is a bright bunch of basically all white men who were very well educated, going for their PhD in engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. And during the course of my discussion, I didn't realize that these engineering students were on the left. One of them started attacking me, saying, well, you seem to be very proud to be American. I said, well, yeah, I am. I'm a veteran, too, by the way, honorably discharged United States Air Force. You've got a problem with America. What is it? Well, we're racist. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, white people discriminate against black people. I said, they do? You know what, sir? That would include you, right? He said, yes, you should be arrested. You shouldn't even be in this classroom. But don't speak for me. I worked in Spanish Harlem with these kids and doing the best I could, making the illiterate literate. But you've got this wild-eyed idea. And then after it's over, they said to me, gets right to the point about the different cultures. These students said to me, well, you really think that America is the great. I said, yes, America is the best. That's why our biggest problem is trying to keep all the people from wanting to come in here. Now, this is before the mass migration.
Yeah.
And I said, so let me get it right. You believe that all cultures are equal? They said, yes, we do. I said, okay, I want to just make sure I get this straight.
You set a little trap there.
Yeah, I did. I set a little trap. I said, so what you believe, and they had identified themselves as being Jewish before, so it had certain poignancy to it. I said, you believe that all cultures are equal? I said, yeah, okay. So in other words, in this country, we put pizzas into ovens. And in Hitler's Germany, they put Jews into ovens. That's a matter of different strokes for different folks. They got nervous. They were shaking. They go, no. That's not what we mean. I said, no, excuse me. I just gave you a logical deduction. That's what you mean. There's no difference between cultures. And if you feel upset about that, you don't feel good about it, maybe you ought to go back and rethink your first principles, because something's wrong here. All cultures are not equal. And if you're not prepared to say that, then you can't justify any distinctions. So, yeah.
So if all the cultures are equal and they're trying to change our culture into some other culture, what culture are they trying to make better than our culture?
Well, that's just it.
It's self-defeating again.
Well, if you get rid of Western civilization, what are you going to? Who gave us the idea of law? Equality before law, the idea that all human beings are all of equal dignity. Who gave us the idea that there should be separation between the society and the state? Who gave us the idea of jurisprudence? Who gave us the ideas? Where did all these ideas come from? Where did we learn from the ancients? Wasn't that from the monks from Ireland in particular, who took the manuscripts from antiquity in the Catholic Church and made them available? The first university in the University of Paris. Where did all these ideas come from?
Yeah. Of
equality before the law and, in fact, in the rights of women? What religion has a more elevated place for women? Our Blessed Mother.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you tear us down, what do you want in its place? Where do you want to point to?
Yeah. Speaking of ancient sources, something whenever we're talking about a corrupt society, entitled society, fatherless society, And it's not just the black culture now that really struggles with
right.
father. It's just, the whole country is suffering from this. I love actually the story of the Odyssey, something that people don't connect with this topic, but let me kind of show how that happened. So Odysseus, he goes off with the Greeks and fights in the Trojan War. He's gone 20-something years. In fact, his child, Telemachus, is like 1 or 2 when he leaves, and he comes back, 20 years later. During that time, in the book, when the story begins, we all know that the suitors, as they were called, they were living in Odysseus's house. Penelope's a young man, but they all want to marry Penelope, the wife, the queen of Ithaca, and so they're all sitting there eating all of their food, living off the land, living right out of their cupboards, kind of beating up Telemachus because he's the young, guy who's supposed to replace his father. They all think that Odysseus is dead. So Penelope is weaving her thing every day, and she's untangling at night because she says, whenever I finish this weave, then I will finally marry a suitor, right? So this is the story of the Odyssey. But what's interesting is I heard a scholar once explain that this is the ancient Greek way. This is Homer telling us what a society without fathers looks like. Because why? All of these suitors who were in their 20s and 30s, their fathers went off 20 years before to go to the Trojan War. So they all grew up without fathers. And now they're entitled and they're living off the king's land, which is like the government, and they're disrespectful to the local prophets and priests. They're disrespectful to Penelope. They just feel entitled to live off someone else's. They don't work for themselves. They're just kind of ravaging the king's land. And so eventually Odysseus comes home and just destroys them all. But it's a beautiful ancient articulation of what happens when a society of young men grow up without fathers. They become anti-religion. They become anti-family. They become entitled. They become vulgar. They become violent. And then they're just butchered once Odysseus comes home because of poetic justice. But it's an interesting thing. Even Homer was showing us this.
Well, because he understood human nature.
Yeah, it
and
doesn't
you
change.
see, the war is against human nature in our society. It's interesting. In my new book, Christianity and the Crosshairs, I mentioned Mallory Millett. She's the sister, whom I'd never heard of before, of Kate Millett. Kate Millett was one of the great feminists who wound up in the insane asylum, by the way. She wasn't the only one who did. And she was at a meeting in her apartment in New York City, late 60s, early 70s, and all these feminist women were thinking about different ways to get rid of men. And she said it was really that wild. I mean, I know that so I've read some feminists argue that we're looking at genetic engineering and some of the new things that are AI and what can be done. Maybe we can get a society without men. The hatred of men. Now, again, this is a small segment of the population, but they have oversized influence.
Save the whales, kill the males.
Yeah, that's about it. No, it's true. It's stunning to me how these people, the influence they've had in seducing people who want to think that they have an open mind. The brains have fallen out. The mind is so open. It's got to get back to basics.
Yeah. Now, in your book, you talk about the control of thought and control of behavior. We've talked about the war on the family, but you also get into population control. And it's interesting because every time I start going down some kind of conspiracy theory, which I love to do, which often, by the way, people talk about conspiracies are real. And the theory is just meaning I don't know it for a fact. So I don't have a problem with entertaining conspiracy theories. But I end up bumping into population control all the time. There is something about that that's like deep embedded in the left's agenda. And you talk a little bit about population control. So where are you on that?
Well, you can't get much more elite in the ruling class than the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
They're the ones who pioneered eugenics in this country. They actually helped collaborate a little bit with the Nazis on some of this. They're the force behind abortion. They wanted it. It's all about a filter. The elites envision a society of people pretty much like themselves, or at least where they're going to be in control and they have the docile population. And I've met some of these people personally. One of them passed away. John Tanton was a doctor from Petoskey, Michigan, and I could go on talking about him. I don't want to get too diverse on this, but yeah, they have a vision of the good society. Margaret Sanger, people remember, she was not pro-abortion, even though she founded Planned Parenthood. Her idea of eugenics.
Eugenics, yeah.
Was to have a pure society where you got rid of black people, and she referred to them as the weeds
and disabled.
And disabled. Yeah, these people are a drain on our society. Now, these are the enlightened liberal people. They consider themselves to be the progressives. Okay, that's very much like George Fitzhugh saying we have to have slavery because otherwise the black man can't compete against the white man in capitalism. They're always going to take care of you like that. They'll take care of you all right. So yeah, it's...
Does the left know how viciously racist she was?
They've had to admit it in more recent years, reluctantly. I remember talking to Alexander Sanger, the relative of her, and he tried to deny it, and they too many times the information's come out. Now, I remember debating Gloria Felt, the president of the National Organization for Women, with Phil Donohue, who I did like. I mean, he was a nice man. He passed away. We didn't agree on anything, but he was a gentleman to me, I have to say that, in fairness. And I was on his show, and I set him up, and I said, and the head of Planned Parenthood is sitting next to me, and I read a cue card. Life begins at conception, not a day later, boom, 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 boom. And he goes, who said that? I said, Planned Parenthood, 1963.
Wow.
She just about fell off her seat. So as late as 1963, Planned Parenthood was against abortion. But the Rockefellers came in heavy in the 1960s. And they led the fight, and they got two guys, both Jewish, Lawrence Lader and the other one, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, to carry the fight and start something called NARAL, which led the fight. And they did it by selling the idea that the Catholic Church was basically evil to discredit it, because that was the big foe. And how do we know this? Later stayed true to the pro-abortion agenda. Nathanson was an obstetrician who then became an abortionist, and he saw for the first time what had happened with the sonogram. It changed him. It rocked him.
Really?
He said, I've committed tens of thousands of abortions. I led the fight against the Catholic Church. So I wanted this to happen. And he went into a state of convulsion practically.
Wow.
He changed. He flipped. And he converted to Catholicism.
God bless him.
And people said, wait a minute, why Catholicism? Why not some other religion? He said, the Catholic Church puts a premium on redemption and on forgiveness. And after what I've done with all the babies that I've killed, I need all the forgiveness I can get. But what I also admire about him, he told the truth. It was an anti-Catholic agenda sold to the media. They would say, how many women are getting abortions illegally every year? We just laughed. We made up figures, 10,000, 20,000. By the way, in 1972, the year before Roe v. Wade, the actual number of women who died as a result of a self-induced abortion was 39.
Oh, wow.
Now, 39 is too many, but it wasn't tens of thousands.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
They lied about that,
Wow.
just as they lied about the number of homeless in this country and whatnot. Now, but no, the elites have this kind of argument, and that's what we've got to do. And John Tanton, well, he was very much involved with this, and he founded these immigration societies and the like. He wined and dined me for a while. Because he knew that he didn't like the ACLU, actually, because they were against some of his beliefs. He didn't like the idea of making drugs legal and everything else and whatnot, but he liked the idea of dealing with eugenics. And
yeah, there's a sinister obsession with this, even to where we could pull up. We won't, but we could pull up on YouTube. Bill Gates giving a TED talk where he famously said, "We got to get population under control." And of course, he tried the condoms in Africa and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But he specifically says, it's not a theory, he really did say that you could use vaccines to do this, to get control of the population. So of course, when COVID came out, there was all kinds of theories running around. Is this some kind of effort to control population? And I don't know, but it just is an interesting thing. When you go deep enough, you almost always find population control deep down on the left. And sometimes I wonder, what number do they want? Like, we have 8 billion people now. Do they want 6 billion, 4 billion? Like, what do they want? And do they understand things like Social Security? I mean, like, we are on a death spiral right now. If we didn't have immigration, then we would be a negative birth rate in America for sure. The only reason that we have a growing population is because of immigration. Other countries, you've probably seen it, there's in-depth studies about other countries, Italy, Greece, other places, they're in dire need.
And Japan too.
Japan. China, I guess, has recently, are they changing some laws? Because they're starting to see, like, they're going to have a serious problem when all the old people are sitting in nursing homes and there's no young people to support them.
Right.
What do they do? I mean, so it just makes me wonder, are they dumb? Like, you have to keep expanding this. And there's plenty of space on planet Earth. Like, there's so much of it's not inhabited. There's so many more natural resources. So I don't know what their end game is, but you can't just go from 8 billion to 4 billion. The world won't make it.
Obviously, it all comes down to, I share you're being perplexed about this as I am, because we don't run in those kind of circles. But it does everything. As I point out in the book, comes down to control. That's what they want. That's what Huxley feared, and that's what we see here. And in fact, I do talk a great deal about COVID and what happened there. Not so much about the vaccines, but about the controls that took place.
Yes.
And particularly, you can't go to church, but you can go to Costco. You can, we can put restrictions on religion, but, you can have the liquor store can be open as well, Even Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch had to chime in on that. He said, what's going on here? How do you figure this out? They saw an opportunity to beat down religion one more time, and they took advantage and put the muzzle on us, figuring that'll weaken it. So I'm saying to Catholics, you got to be on your guard.
Yeah. And in this book, you talk about how Christianity is not just ignored, it's a target. And in fact, it might be the only, maybe even Catholicism specifically, the last, what do you call it? Like the remaining, the one last allowed discrimination. I mean, you're just, the society media allows people to defame Catholicism, and it's excusable. Any other defamation is unaccepted, it seems.
I think the radical left, of course, they're militant secularists, and the elites, not just WEF, but a lot of them in our society are that way. They don't like orthodoxy. They don't like it. Look, they don't like Orthodox Jews, and they don't like Muslims. They don't like. I'm talking about moderate people here, and they don't like Protestants. And like, why do they always go after the Catholic Church? Because we're the big fat target. We're enormous, 1.3 billion people, been around for 2,000 years. If you can drop us, you can drop everybody else. Why go after the small potatoes? It's always the Catholic Church is the big prize that you want to get. Orthodox Jews are too small in this country. Mormons are too small, and the like. The evangelicals, they go after them. Yeah. They're second to Catholics. They want to go after them as well. So if you can discredit them, then again, you paved the way. Now, under President Trump, he has this Religious Freedom Commission. He's appointed Attorney General Pam Bondi to be in charge of a task force dealing with anti-Christian bias from the federal government, and I've been working with her. Thank God we have some people there to deal with it. Look, one of my biggest concerns at the Catholic League, and it ties into the book, we need to keep religious exemptions. That's what the left is trying to do. They're not just trying to target us in every such way. They want to get rid of religious exemption. Of course, if you get rid of religious exemptions, then you've secularized us. That's essentially what they've done.
Yes.
So that's why when George W. Bush set up the faith-based communities,
I remember.
Okay, he said they do a better job than the secular ones. We should stop pretending that they don't. What happens when Obama comes in? They weaken them. They secularize them. Then Trump comes in and he brought them back. And then Biden came in and he secularized them. And now Trump is in again. Faith-based institutions have to have a right, for example, to choose. If I'm an Orthodox Jew, don't tell me I have to hire Catholics or Protestants to work in the foster care. Yeah. And same thing with the Catholics. I don't want somebody of some other religion working there. They say, well, we have to have diversity. Diversity, baloney. It's a weapon to beat down and to neutralize. That's the game, what they're doing here. They keep using the term diversity. But quite frankly, that means, they always say we shouldn't just have December as being for Christians. We have so many different religions in this country. Why don't you choose something diverse in February? No, February is Black History Month.
And that's it.
Okay?
Nothing
now,
else.
if you want to start celebrating the Irish and the Italians, they're going to be told take a walk. And you should. You can't be everything to everybody. Right. Being all-inclusive means you don't really have the kind of diversity. See, it's a contradiction in and of itself.
I remember when George Bush came out with the faith-based initiative programs, and Jim Toohey, if you remember him, I got to know him when I was in law school. I was in law school while he was running that department in the White House. Got to go to the White House, spend some time with Jim Toohey there. He was Mother Teresa's lawyer, fascinating guy. But then 9/11, I think, kind of derailed, George Bush's attempt to really do something with that. I think that was a major campaign initiative. He really wanted to show that the federal government can coexist with faith-based initiatives, but then 9/11 just derailed all of it and everyone forgot about that. I think that had something to do with it. But anyway, so it just seems to me that that the Catholicism is the last remaining allowed discrimination.
Arthur Schlesinger Sr. said it, and he was Jewish. He made it very, very clear about that. Daniel Patrick Moynihan mentioned the same thing.
Yeah. And the last two chapters of your book, Smearing Christianity and Stealth Maneuvers. So, there's a difference, and you kind of have an eye on their war tactics. Some of their attacks, of course, are direct, but there's a lot that are very stealth. And you talk about these stealth maneuvers. Talk to us a little bit about that, because most people don't see it.
This idea, for example, that we have all of these nuns in Ireland who have these mass graves, and they malnourished the children, they beat them, they savage them. And the whole idea is to say to Catholics, you should be ashamed of your past. Look what these vicious nuns did in Ireland. Then they made the argument in Canada. It was all a lie.
It was all a lie. The Indian reservation thing.
It was all a hoax.
It was all a hoax.
And I debated these people on the radio, by the way, from Ireland. I happen to be an Irish citizen as well as an American citizen. They say, well, this woman Corliss, she was the historian. She wasn't a historian. She was a typist. But they called her locally a local historian. She put these together. She said there were 800 skeletons found. No, there were 15 to 20. How do we know? Because that's what Barry Sweeney and his friend said. They're the ones who gave the testimony to this. People want to believe the worst about the Catholic Church, so they just bring up these lies. And by the way, this idea that these nuns too were mistreated, and that movie Philomena, and my son, I never really met him, and I was forced to sign contracts and whatnot, and all the beatings went on. I've read the McLeese report. It was all a lie what happened with the Magdalene sisters, and the doctors admitted it as well. This woman came over here. When her own mother had left her, and her father put the kids in with the nuns, and she voluntarily gave up her child. All right, a Wisconsin couple took the child. They said they paid for it. They didn't pay any. They gave a gratuity after the fact. They didn't say this is a quid pro quo on this. I've looked at this stuff very carefully. She never went looking for a son. All that lies that were made up in that movie, Judi Dench. And then you get the Da Vinci Code, and you get angels and demons, and I've gone through all this stuff. The Jesus tomb hoax, Jesus. No, I've debated these people. I've met these people, and by the way, they don't do too well in debate with me. No. James Cameron of Titanic fame, I thought he was going to have a nervous heart attack over the Today Show when they do their makeup, and he said, "That's Bill Donohue next to you." He went speechless because I went right at these guys. I've never seen an institution where they try to get away, and you know, when the truth comes out, it's buried on page 829 in the New York Times. It's not on the front page anymore.
They know what they're doing.
And all the lies about Cardinal and about Sarah, how he tortured the Indians. I have a big section in the book all about this. And my back and forth with the New York Times asking for the evidence. They didn't have one iota of evidence. And yet they continue on with this. It's just, and you wouldn't do this with any other different religion. Although I have to say, and it surprises me, the anti-Semitic attacks that are taking place in New York City these days is astounding to me. I'm there every day.
Two last questions. After all these years on the front lines and this incredible book, you know, it really distills down a lot. It shows kind of a panoramic view of how you have envisioned the left's mindset and what their tactics are. And so it's great. I can't wait till it comes out. After all these years on the front lines, if you could give one piece of advice to younger Catholics preparing to fight for faith and freedom, what would that be?
Don't be dependent on the mainstream media. Look at tan books. Look at reputable Catholic sources. Take the advice from a pastor or a priest who you have good counsel with and whom you admire. Be discerning. And once you find out the true facts, then you have to spread the word and have the courage to do so publicly. I'm not asking you to give up your job and lose your job and become a cultural warrior. I get paid to do it. I'm not asking that. I am saying this. When you're in the circle of people and you're not allowed to say anything bad or make a joke about anybody else because of political correctness, but they start in with Catholics, you can gently say to them, excuse me, you know, I am Catholic here, and I don't appreciate that kind of derision. You know, you've got to be a little bit more proactive in that sense in speaking out, because the other side, believe me, they're not bashful at all.
Last question. You've had an amazing career. By any standard, you have an amazing career. Your impact has had tremendous influence on individuals, on institutions. When you walk into the room, the enemy is afraid, and your friends are rejoicing. So it's Dr. Bill Donohue has been an amazing impact on our country and our church. When you look back over your career, the battles you fought, the cultural wars you've lived through, the sufferings you've had to endure, the lies you've had to listen to,
death threats,
the death threats that fill up an entire box in your house. What are you most proud of?
The fact that I can inspire people whom I've never really met. I walk into a room, they recognize me from TV, they come over to me and help me, how they've helped change my life. That to me, because sometimes it's kind of lonely. I'm sitting there, I'm writing all day long. I'm a workaholic. I work 6 days a week. And sometimes you just don't know the effect of what you're having on other people. And then when people write you a letter, they email you, you meet them in public, and they say, keep on going. You speak for me. That to me is so gratifying.
Well, you're not. I hope you'll never be lonely again. Tan is your friend and the Catholic League's friend. And the Gallagher family is here for you personally and for your organization. So I hope we can have many more things to do together in the future.
We will.
But thank you for being here. You're an inspiration to me. You know, I'm not brand new in my career, but I'm still got a long ways to go, God willing. And I look at somebody like you, and it actually gives me a lot of hope that I can persevere through the difficulties and fight for Holy Mother Church and for the country. So thank you for being here.
Well, the inspiration is reciprocal with you, your family, and the TAN team.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.